My parents kicked me out of my room for my sister and raised my rent to $2,200. At dinner, I stood up and said, "Funny. I haven't lived here for 7 weeks." My mom's voice shook. "Wait. So where exactly are you living?" You know, I never thought I'd be the one telling this kind of story. I used to scroll through them late at night, shaking my head at how unbelievably cruel families could be, whispering to myself, that could never happen to me. My parents love me. My siblings, sure, they're annoying, but they'd never truly betray me. Family is family, right? But then, reality hits you like a freight train you never saw coming. And suddenly, you're the cautionary tale someone else is reading at 2 in the morning. My name doesn't really matter. What matters is that just 3 months ago, I was 26, a graphic designer, still living in my childhood bedroom. I was paying my parents a solid $800 a month in rent, meticulously saving every penny for a down payment on my own place. I had a plan, a timeline. I had $17,000 tucked away, and my goal was to be out of that house by my 27th birthday in October. But my older sister Miranda, well, she had very different plans for my life. Miranda is 31. She's married to a guy named Quentin, who has literally never held a job for longer than 18 months, and she's the mother of 2 kids she mostly ignores in favor of her ever-growing wine collection and her perfectly curated Instagram aesthetic. She married Quentin 5 years ago, in a ceremony that cost my parents $43,000. And I know that number by heart because my mother, Claudia, mentioned it every single time I asked for anything throughout my early 20s. Need a new laptop for college? Well, your sister's wedding cost $43,000. Help with textbooks? Your sister's wedding cost $43,000. Miranda was always the favorite. I guess I finally accepted that reality somewhere around age 12, when my parents straight up canceled my birthday party because Miranda had a dance recital the same weekend, and they just couldn't possibly manage both. She was 17, and had been dancing for 13 years by then. My 12th birthday, the first one where I was actually allowed to have boys attend, just vanished from the calendar. My mother, Claudia, and my father, Raymond, have always operated under this bizarre assumption that Miranda's life is inherently harder than mine. She has children, after all. She has a husband who can't seem to stay employed. And, of course, she has anxiety, which, while never formally diagnosed, she assures everyone at every family gathering is a very real thing. My problems, my student loans, my demanding job, the soul-crushing loneliness of being the invisible child, those just never registered on their radar. So, when Miranda announced in March that she and Quentin were selling their house because they couldn't afford the mortgage anymore, I knew exactly what was coming. I just didn't expect the execution to be quite so brutal. The conversation went down on a Tuesday evening. I'd just gotten home from work, still in my blazer, and those ridiculously uncomfortable heels I keep under my desk for client meetings. My parents were sitting at the kitchen table, wearing those serious expressions that usually precede announcements about dead relatives or a major financial catastrophe. "We need to talk about the living situation," my father said. I set my bag on the counter, a cold dread already settling in. Okay, Miranda and the family are going to be moving in for a while until they get back on their feet. I had expected this. Dreaded it. But yes, I expected it. How long is a while? I asked. My parents exchanged the look. You know the one. The look that means they'd already discussed this extensively and agreed on a unified front. My mother folded her hands on the table. We're not putting a timeline on it. They need support right now. Fine, I said, leaning against the counter, crossing my arms. I'll stay out of their way. The kids can have the guest room, and Miranda and Quentin can take the basement. There's plenty of space down there if Dad clears out his workshop area. The silence that followed screamed everything I needed to know. Actually, my father said slowly, clearing his throat. We were thinking the kids could have your room. I laughed. It was high, sharp, filled with pure disbelief, not an ounce of humor. My room? The room I'm paying rent for. It's the biggest bedroom besides ours, my mother said, as if this were the most perfectly reasonable explanation in the world. The children need space. Garrett is 7 now, and he can't share with his sister anymore. It wouldn't be appropriate. So, I asked, my voice flat, where exactly am I supposed to go? Another exchanged look. My father cleared his throat again. The basement. We'll set up a nice space for you down there. Your mother found a futon online that has excellent reviews. A futon. In the basement. The one where the water heater groans like a dying beast at 3 a.m. The one where the ceiling leaks every single time it rains. The one with windows too small to let in any natural light. You want me to move to the basement? I said, the words barely a whisper. So that Miranda's children can have my bedroom? The bedroom I pay $800 a month for. My mother's expression shifted into something wounded, as if I were being unreasonable. Vivian, you're a single woman with no children. Miranda has a family. Surely you can understand that their needs are greater than yours. What about my needs? I wanted to scream. What about the fact that I've been paying rent for 2 years to save up for my own place? What about the fact that I work 50 hours a week and deserve to come home to something better than a basement futon? We've discussed the rent situation as well, my father interrupted, his voice steady. Given that you'll be using shared spaces more frequently with additional family members in the house, we think it's fair to raise your contribution. I stared at him, my heart pounding in my ears. Raise it to what? He didn't flinch. $2,200. $2,200. For a basement futon. In my parents' house. While my sister and her deadbeat husband occupied the main living spaces rent-free. You're joking. We're not, my mother said, her voice firm. Miranda and Quentin can't afford to contribute right now, so the household expenses will need to be distributed differently. This is a family, Vivian. We support each other. I could have screamed. I could have thrown something. I could have pointed out the staggering hypocrisy of charging me nearly 3 times my current rent while my sister paid nothing. Or the sheer absurdity of expecting me to downgrade my living situation while simultaneously paying more. Or the decades of favoritism that had perfectly culminated in this exact moment. Instead, I did something I had never done before in my entire life. I said nothing. I picked up my bag, walked to my room, and closed the door. I sat on my bed, the bed I had slept in since I was 14, surrounded by the books I'd collected over 12 years, the artwork I'd created, the small, precious evidence of a life I'd tried to build. And in that moment, I made a decision. They wanted me out? Fine. But I would do it on my terms. And they would not see it coming. Sleep didn't come that night. I lay in the darkness, staring at the ceiling I had memorized over 12 years, tracing the small crack near the light fixture that had appeared during a storm when I was 19. My mind replayed every moment of the conversation downstairs, dissecting each word, each exchanged glance between my parents, each casual assumption that my comfort and my dignity were acceptable sacrifices on the altar of Miranda's perpetual needs. $2,200. The number echoed in my skull like a taunt. My studio apartment search 6 months ago had turned up places for less than that. Actual apartments. With actual kitchens. Actual windows that opened to actual sunlight. My parents wanted to charge me more than market rate for a basement futon, while my sister contributed nothing. Around 3 o'clock in the morning, I started making lists. I've always been a list person. It's how I process, how I plan, how I transform overwhelming emotions into actionable steps. By dawn, I had filled 7 pages of a legal pad with an inventory of my belongings, timeline considerations, potential obstacles, and contingency plans. The most important realization came somewhere around page 4. My parents expected me to react. They expected tears, arguments, slammed doors, the dramatic confrontation that would allow them to paint me as unreasonable and difficult. They expected me to eventually capitulate, as I always had, accepting their terms because the alternative, homelessness, family estrangement, the terrifying unknown, seemed worse than submission. They had miscalculated. Years of being overlooked had given me something valuable, the ability to operate unnoticed. If they didn't see me when I was right in front of them, they certainly wouldn't see me planning my escape. The very next morning, I called my Aunt Sylvia. She's my mother's younger sister, the black sheep of the family who had the audacity to remain single and childless and happy about it. She owns a beautiful 3-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood about 20 minutes from my parents' place. And she has always been more of a mother to me than Claudia ever managed. Let me guess, Aunt Sylvia said when I explained the situation, her voice dry. Miranda's moving back in, and suddenly you're not good enough to breathe the same air. Something like that. Pack your things, she said without hesitation. The guest room has been waiting for you since you were 16, and told me you wished I was your mother instead. I cried. I'm not ashamed to admit it. Aunt Sylvia had always existed on the periphery of family gatherings, tolerated but never fully embraced. She had committed the unforgivable sin of choosing herself, remaining unmarried despite several proposals, building a successful career as a financial consultant, traveling to 37 countries, and showing absolutely no remorse for any of it. My mother always referred to her as poor Sylvia in that pitying tone reserved for people who had failed to follow the prescribed life script, conveniently ignoring that Aunt Sylvia owned her home outright, had a retirement fund that could sustain a small country, and radiated a contentment that Claudia had never achieved despite checking every box on the conventional happiness checklist. Growing up, I had always gravitated toward my aunt during family events, drawn by her genuine interest in my thoughts and her refusal to ever compare me, favorably or unfavorably, to Miranda. She asked about my art projects, remembered the names of my friends, and once drove 3 hours to attend my high school graduation when my parents arrived late because Miranda's yoga class ran over and she needed a ride home first. The morning after my parents delivered their ultimatum, Aunt Sylvia listened to the entire story without interrupting. When I finished, the silence stretched long enough that I worried the call had dropped. I want you to know something, she finally said. Your grandmother Edith saw this coming. Before she died, she told me to watch out for you. Said Claudia had always struggled to love 2 children equally, and you were the one who'd pay the price. My throat tightened. Grandma Edith had passed when I was 20, and I still missed her with an ache that surprised me. She said that more than once, Sylvia continued. She also said you were stronger than you knew, and that one day you'd stop accepting crumbs and demand the whole meal. A pause. I think that day has arrived, sweetheart. The logistics took planning. I couldn't simply disappear overnight. My parents would have noticed immediately, and the confrontation would have happened before I was ready. Instead, I began a careful, methodical extraction of my life from that house. I told my parents I agreed to their terms. I smiled and nodded when my mother explained the timeline for Miranda's arrival. I even helped my father clear out the basement and pretended to be grateful for the futon they had purchased. Every night, after everyone went to sleep, I carried boxes to my car and drove them to Aunt Sylvia's house. My books went first, then my winter clothes, which no one would notice missing in April. My important documents. My grandmother Edith's jewelry that had been left to me specifically in her will, despite my mother's attempts to convince me to share it with Miranda. My artwork, carefully wrapped in bubble wrap and stored in Aunt Sylvia's garage. The jewelry situation deserves its own explanation. Grandma Edith had been a collector of vintage pieces. Nothing extraordinarily valuable in monetary terms, but each item carried history and sentiment. Her engagement ring from my grandfather, a modest sapphire surrounded by tiny diamonds, a pearl necklace she'd inherited from her own mother, a charm bracelet documenting 50 years of anniversaries and milestones. In her will, she had been explicit. The collection was to go to me, her younger granddaughter, because, as she wrote, Vivian has always appreciated beautiful things for their stories rather than their price tags. Miranda received a generous cash inheritance instead, which she promptly spent on a destination bachelorette party in Costa Rica. My mother had been furious about the jewelry distribution. For years, she had dropped hints about how much Miranda admired certain pieces, how it wasn't really fair for one granddaughter to have everything, how sharing would honor Grandma Edith's memory of family unity. I had resisted, clutching those pieces as tangible proof that someone in my family had truly seen me. Now, packing them carefully into a velvet-lined box, I understood why Grandma Edith had made her choice legally binding. She had known her daughter would try to redistribute my inheritance to the favored child. She had protected me even from beyond the grave. The process of moving my life in fragments took nearly 3 weeks. I developed a system. Each night after my parents went to bed, I would load my car with whatever fit: books in reusable grocery bags, clothes in garbage bags to disguise their contents, fragile items cushioned between pillows and blankets. The drive to Aunt Sylvia's house took 22 minutes at that hour, when the roads were empty and the world felt like it belonged only to me. Aunt Sylvia never complained about the late arrivals. She would be waiting with tea and quiet company, helping me unload and organize before sending me back with a thermos of coffee for the return trip. Sometimes we talked, often we didn't. The silence between us had always been comfortable, free of the tension that permeated every interaction with my parents. By the time Miranda arrived with her husband and children and 17 suitcases worth of belongings, my room contained only the furniture and enough clothing to maintain the illusion that I still lived there. I even kept up appearances. I came home from work at my usual time, reheated whatever dinner my mother had made, and retreated to the basement. I pretended to sleep on the futon, while actually driving to Aunt Sylvia's house around midnight, returning early enough in the morning to shower before work. My parents didn't notice. They were too busy catering to Miranda's needs, making breakfast for the children, doing Miranda's laundry because she was too overwhelmed to manage it herself, adjusting the household schedule around Quentin's job interviews that never seemed to result in actual employment. The dynamic shift in the household was remarkable to witness from my position of invisible observer. My mother transformed into a combination personal chef and cleaning service, preparing elaborate meals that accommodated Miranda's new gluten sensitivity and the children's picky eating habits. My father surrendered his home office so Quentin could have a quiet space for his online job applications. Applications I suspected he spent more time complaining about than actually completing. Meanwhile, the basement became increasingly uninhabitable. The children discovered it made an excellent indoor playground, leaving toys scattered across every surface and somehow managing to break the futon's frame within the first week. Water damage from an April storm created a persistent musty smell that no amount of air freshener could mask. The single basement bathroom developed a running toilet that my father kept promising to fix when things settled down. The irony wasn't lost on me. The space my parents had deemed acceptable for their younger daughter at premium rental rates had become unsuitable even for storage. My coworkers noticed the change in me before anyone in my family did. Jennifer, the senior designer who had mentored me since my first day at the firm, commented that I seemed lighter, somehow less burdened. I told her I was sleeping better, which was true. I didn't mention that my improved sleep came from an actual bed in a welcoming home rather than the futon in my parents' basement. Work became a sanctuary of normalcy. I threw myself into projects with renewed energy, volunteering for challenging assignments and staying late to perfect details that previous exhaustion had forced me to overlook. My portfolio grew stronger. My confidence expanded in ways that surprised even me. One afternoon, about 3 weeks into my secret exodus, Jennifer asked if I wanted to grab dinner after work. We ended up at a small Italian restaurant near the office, sharing a bottle of wine and trading stories about difficult clients. Somewhere between the appetizers and the main course, she asked about my living situation. The question caught me off guard. I hadn't told anyone about the arrangement with my parents, the ultimatum, or my covert relocation. But something about Jennifer's genuine interest, so different from the performative concern my mother occasionally displayed, made me want to share. I told her everything: the favoritism, the basement futon, the $2,200 rent demand, the elaborate plan to disappear without confrontation. She listened without interrupting, her expression shifting from disbelief to anger to something that looked a lot like admiration. "Let me make sure I understand," she said when I finished. "You've been secretly living somewhere else for over 3 weeks, maintaining the illusion of residence at your parents' house, and none of them have figured it out? Not even close. My dad mentioned last week that I should try to be quieter coming in at night because Miranda complained about noise. I wasn't even there. I haven't spent a single night in that basement since before she moved in." Jennifer raised her glass. "That's the most impressive thing I've heard in years. To invisible women everywhere, may we use our powers for exactly this kind of strategic brilliance." We clinked glasses, and for the first time since the whole ordeal began, I felt something like pride. The first month's rent came due. I told my father I was waiting for my paycheck to clear. He reminded me twice, then seemed to forget about it. The second month passed the same way. By the third month, I had stopped responding to his texts about payment entirely, and he apparently decided that confrontation wasn't worth the effort. Meanwhile, I was thriving. Aunt Sylvia's guest room had become my sanctuary, a bright, airy space with windows that actually let in sunlight, a real bed with a real mattress, and a door that locked. I contributed to household expenses fairly, splitting utilities and groceries. I started sleeping through the night for the first time in years. My work improved. My anxiety decreased. I began to understand what it felt like to be valued instead of tolerated. Living with Aunt Sylvia revealed how abnormal my family dynamics had always been. She asked about my day and actually listened to the answer. She noticed when I seemed stressed and offered support without making me feel like a burden. She celebrated small victories, a successful client presentation, a good hair day, finding the perfect avocado at the grocery store, with the enthusiasm my parents reserved exclusively for Miranda's accomplishments. We developed routines that felt nourishing rather than obligatory. Sunday mornings meant farmers' market runs and elaborate brunches. Tuesday evenings were for documentary nights, curled up on her comfortable couch with popcorn and commentary. Friday afternoons, she'd leave work early, and we'd explore different neighborhoods, discovering cafes and bookshops and hidden gardens that made the city feel new again. For the first time in my adult life, I understood what home was supposed to feel like. Aunt Sylvia also helped me process the complicated grief of realizing my parents would never be what I needed them to be. Late one night, about 5 weeks into my stay, I broke down crying over something trivial. A commercial featuring a mother and daughter baking cookies together. The absurdity of my tears made them flow harder, and soon I was sobbing on her couch, mourning a relationship I had never actually had. She held me without speaking, stroking my hair the way my mother never had. When the tears finally subsided, she handed me tissues and sat with me in the quiet. "It's okay to grieve them," she said gently, "even though they're still alive. Sometimes the loss of what should have been hurts more than actual death." "How do you do it?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "How do you stay so okay with being the family outcast?" A sad smile crossed her face. "Because I realized something important about 30 years ago. My worth doesn't depend on Claudia's approval. My happiness doesn't require her validation. She's my sister and I love her, but I stopped expecting her to love me back the way I needed a long time ago." "Does it still hurt?" "Sometimes. When I see other families at holidays, or when I remember how close we were as children before everything got complicated." She took my hand. "But the alternative, spending my life trying to earn something she's not capable of giving, would have hurt more. I chose peace over proximity, and I've never regretted it." Her words stayed with me long after that conversation ended. I had spent 26 years hoping that if I was just good enough, quiet enough, accommodating enough, my parents would finally see me the way they saw Miranda. Aunt Sylvia's example offered another path, accepting reality, and building a life that didn't depend on their limited capacity for equitable love. The family dinner that changed everything was my mother's idea. She wanted a real family meal, to celebrate some arbitrary milestone. Quentin had finally gotten a job, a part-time position at a hardware store that he would inevitably quit within 2 months. Everyone was required to attend. I almost didn't go. Aunt Sylvia offered to claim she needed me for something, giving me an easy excuse. But there was a part of me, the part that had been invisible for 26 years, the part that had absorbed every slight and every dismissal and every $43,000 wedding reference, that wanted to see their faces. So, I went. The dinner was pot roast, my mother's specialty. Miranda held court at one end of the table, complaining about how exhausting it was to be a stay-at-home mother now that she didn't have her house's open floor plan to help her keep an eye on the children. Quentin contributed nothing to the conversation except occasional grunts of agreement with whatever his wife said. My father asked me about work in that distant, disinterested tone he always used, and my mother interrupted my answer to ask Miranda if she wanted more wine. Somewhere between the pot roast and the dessert, my father cleared his throat. "Vivian, we need to discuss the rent situation." I set down my fork. "Do we? You're 3 months behind. That's $6,600. Miranda's eyebrows rose. Quentin actually looked up from his plate. Even the children went quiet, sensing drama. We've been patient, my mother added, her voice carrying that particular martyr tone she had perfected over decades. We understand money can be tight, but Miranda and Quentin are trying to save up for a new place. And we need everyone to contribute. I looked at my sister, lounging in her chair with her third glass of wine. I looked at Quentin, who had contributed exactly zero to this household despite being an able-bodied adult. I looked at my parents, who had charged me rent since I was 24 while Miranda had lived expense-free in a house they helped her buy and then lost to her own financial mismanagement. And I laughed. I stood up from the table, carefully setting my napkin beside my plate. How funny, I said. I haven't lived here for 7 weeks. The silence was absolute. Even the children understood that something significant had just happened. My mother's face went through a rapid series of emotions. Confusion, disbelief, and something that might have been the beginning of panic. Her voice wavered when she spoke. Wait, so where exactly are you living? Somewhere I'm actually wanted. I pushed in my chair. I moved out 3 weeks before Miranda arrived. I've been playing along because I wanted to see how long it would take any of you to notice that I wasn't actually sleeping in that basement. The answer, apparently, is 7 weeks. 7 weeks. And none of you realized I was gone. That's impossible, my father said. Your car has been in the driveway. I parked it there to maintain appearances. I've been staying elsewhere, with someone who actually cares about my well-being. Miranda's expression had shifted from surprise to outrage. You've been lying to us for almost 2 months. You've been lying to me for 31 years. You've taken everything. Every birthday that got canceled for your recital. Every holiday that revolved around your needs. Every dollar that went to your wedding, and your house, and your lifestyle, while I was told to be grateful for scraps. You want to talk about lying? Let's talk about how Mom and Dad have spent 3 decades pretending they don't have a favorite child. My mother stood up so quickly her chair scraped against the floor. Vivian Marie, that is completely unfair. We love you both equally. Really? Then why is Miranda living here rent-free while you tried to charge me $2,200 for a basement futon? Why did you cancel my 13th birthday party because Miranda had a cold and needed attention? Why did you pay for her entire college education while telling me to take out loans because you couldn't afford to help me? These weren't rhetorical questions. I had carried them for years, turning them over in my mind during sleepless nights, cataloging every instance of favoritism as evidence of my own unworthiness. My mother's mouth opened and closed several times. My father studied his plate as if it contained the secrets of the universe. It was Miranda who broke the silence. You're being dramatic. You always do this. Make everything about yourself when the family is going through a difficult time. I turned to my sister, and for the first time in my life, I felt nothing. No jealousy, no resentment, no desperate desire for her approval or her portion of our parents' love. You're right, I said. I am making this about myself. I'm making it about myself for the first time in 26 years, because no one else in this family ever has. I'm done being the afterthought. I'm done being the one who's expected to sacrifice so that you can maintain a lifestyle you haven't earned. Miranda's face contorted with something between rage and disbelief. She had never been contradicted like this. Not by me, certainly, and rarely by anyone. The golden child wasn't accustomed to tarnish. Do you have any idea what I've been through? She demanded. Losing the house, uprooting my children, having to move back in with our parents at 31. This has been the hardest year of my life. And you're making it about some childhood grievances that you should have gotten over decades ago. Your hardest year, I repeated, my voice dripping with irony. The year where you lost a house because you and Quentin spent beyond your means, and our parents immediately opened their home to you rent-free. And Mom does your laundry, while Dad gives up his office for your husband who can't hold down a job. That's your hardest year. I have children to think about. You wouldn't understand, because you're alone. But when you have kids, everything changes. You're right. I wouldn't understand. Because when I needed help, when I was 22 and drowning in student loans that you never had because Mom and Dad paid for your entire education, I was told to figure it out myself. When I asked if I could live at home after graduation to save money, I was told I needed to learn independence. You got a down payment gift for your first house. I got lectures about financial responsibility. My mother's hands had started shaking. That's not fair. The situations were different. How? How are they different, Mom? I turned to face her directly. Tell me what magical quality Miranda possessed that made her worthy of support while I had to earn every scrap of assistance. The silence stretched long enough to become its own answer. Quentin muttered something about drama queens. I ignored him. I've already cancelled any forwarding of my mail here. I've removed my name from any shared accounts. I've taken everything that belongs to me, including Grandma Edith's jewelry that Mom was going to give to Miranda the moment I wasn't paying attention. I looked at my mother. Yes, I know about that. Aunt Sylvia told me everything. My mother's face went pale. She had clearly underestimated how much information her sister had been sharing with me over the years. I want you to know that I'm not doing this out of anger, I continued. I'm doing this because I finally understand that I deserve better than what this family has ever offered me. I deserve to be someone's priority, not just an obligation. I deserve to live somewhere I'm wanted, not tolerated. And I deserve a family that actually sees me as a person, not just a source of income or a convenient scapegoat when things go wrong. I headed toward the front door. My father called after me, something about being reasonable, about talking this through, about families sticking together. I paused with my hand on the doorknob. Family sticks together? I asked, my voice calm, clear. Then why did none of you notice I was gone for 7 weeks? Why did none of you call to check on me, or knock on the basement door, or wonder why you never heard me moving around down there? No one answered. I'll tell you why. Because I've always been invisible to you. The difference is now, I'm choosing to be invisible somewhere that actually feels like home. I walked out. I got in my car, which had been parked in my usual spot for appearances, and I drove to Aunt Sylvia's house. She was waiting on the porch with a bottle of wine and a knowing smile. How did it go? They didn't even realize I was gone. She poured me a glass. Their loss, sweetheart. Their absolute loss. We sat on her porch until well past midnight, watching the stars emerge and fade behind passing clouds. I told her everything, the confrontation, my mother's shaking hands, Miranda's indignation, my father's studied silence. She listened with the attentiveness I had learned to expect from her, and the compassion I had stopped expecting from anyone else. You should know, she said eventually, that your mother called me about an hour after you left their house. I tensed. What did she say? She wanted to know if you were here. I told her I hadn't seen you. A conspiratorial grin spread across her face. That's technically true. I hadn't arrived yet. Exactly what I was thinking. I laughed. The first genuine laugh since the dinner had begun. She also tried to get me to agree that you were being unreasonable and dramatic. I suggested she consider why her daughter felt the need to secretly move out rather than confront her directly, and she hung up on me. She's going to be furious with you. Claudia has been furious with me since 1987. I've learned to live with her disapproval. She clinked her glass against mine. Runs in the family, apparently. The next few days brought a barrage of communication attempts. My phone lit up constantly with calls and texts from my mother, my father, even Miranda, though her messages leaned more toward accusations than reconciliation. I read them all, responded to none, and tried to focus on the life I was building rather than the one I had escaped. The aftermath was predictable in some ways and surprising in others. My mother called 17 times in the first 48 hours. My father sent a single text. Your mother is very upset. Please call her. Miranda posted a series of vague Instagram stories about toxic family members and people who abandon you when you need them most. I didn't respond to any of it. 3 weeks after the dinner, I received a formal letter from my parents' attorney demanding payment for the 3 months of unpaid rent. I forwarded it to a lawyer friend who confirmed what I already knew. There was no lease, no formal agreement, and no legal standing for their claim. I sent a polite response, declining to pay for a space I had never occupied. The attorney's reply was swift and embarrassed. Apparently, my parents had neglected to mention that I hadn't actually lived in the basement during the months they claimed I owed rent. Their case evaporated. I heard through Aunt Sylvia that the legal consultation cost my father $800. Coincidentally, the exact amount of my original monthly rent before they decided to triple it. There was a certain poetic justice in that figure. My mother attempted one final intervention about 6 weeks after the dinner. She showed up at my office, something she had never done in the 4 years I'd worked there, clutching a paper bag from my favorite childhood bakery. The receptionist called me, sounding confused. "There's a woman here who says she's your mother. She has pastries." I considered refusing to see her. I considered calling security. Instead, I took a deep breath and walked to the lobby, steeling myself for whatever manipulation tactic she had chosen. She looked older than I remembered. Or maybe I was finally seeing her clearly, without the filter of desperate hope. Her smile wavered when she saw my expression. "I brought those almond croissants you used to love," she said, holding up the bag like a peace offering. "I thought maybe we could talk." "About what?" "About this whole situation, about finding a way forward." She glanced around the lobby, clearly uncomfortable with the public setting. "Can we go somewhere private?" Against my better judgment, I led her to an empty conference room. She sat across from me, the pastry bag between us like a demilitarized zone. "I don't understand what happened," she began. "One day, everything was fine, and then suddenly you're gone. You're accusing us of terrible things. You're refusing to answer our calls. Your father barely sleeps anymore. Miranda cries every time your name comes up." "Miranda cries because she lost her scapegoat," I said flatly. "And everything wasn't fine, Mom. It hasn't been fine for 26 years. You just never noticed because you were too busy focusing on your other daughter. That's not fair. We've always loved you both equally." I had prepared for this moment without realizing it. I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder. The same folder I had compiled during those sleepless nights after the rent ultimatum, filled with documentation of every instance of favoritism I could remember. Miranda's college tuition, $42,000, paid in full. Mine? Loans I'm still paying off. My mother opened her mouth to protest. I kept going. Miranda's wedding, $43,000. My graduation gift? A $100 check, and a card you both forgot to sign. Miranda's first house, a $25,000 down payment gift. Me asking to live at home to save money? Denied, because I needed to learn independence. The situations were completely different. How? Explain to me how they were different, Mom. Use specific words. Tell me what quality Miranda possessed that made her deserve 6 figures of financial support while I got lectures about responsibility. She stared at me, mouth working soundlessly. The croissants sat untouched between us. "I thought so," I said, standing and gathering my things. "You came here hoping I would apologize for embarrassing you at dinner, that I would minimize everything I said and go back to being the invisible daughter who makes no demands. I'm not going to do that. Vivian, please. We can work through this. Family therapy, mediation, whatever you need. What I need is for you to acknowledge just once that you treated me differently. That Miranda has always been your priority. That you spent 3 decades making me feel like a burden while treating her like a blessing." I paused at the door. "When you're ready to have that conversation, honestly, you know how to reach me. But I'm done pretending everything is fine when it never has been." I left her sitting in the conference room with her almond croissants and her rationalizations. She didn't follow. Miranda and Quentin lasted 4 more months at my parents' house before the arrangement imploded. According to Aunt Sylvia's intelligence network, she maintained surprising connections within the family. Quentin lost the hardware store job for chronic lateness. Miranda had a screaming fight with our mother over whose turn it was to cook dinner. And the children destroyed a significant portion of the basement. The same basement where I was supposed to live on a futon for $2,200 a month. They're renting an apartment now, funded by yet another loan from our parents. Quentin has found a new job that he's already complaining about. Miranda has pivoted her Instagram presence to focus on overcoming adversity and the strength of marriage during difficult seasons. I unfollowed her months ago. My life, meanwhile, has changed in ways I couldn't have imagined. I'm still living with Aunt Sylvia, though I'm actively looking for my own apartment now that I've rebuilt my savings. My relationship with my parents is non-existent, a reality that hurts less than I expected. I've started therapy, which has helped me process decades of being treated as less than. Most importantly, I've learned that family isn't always the people who share your blood. Sometimes family is the aunt who opens her door without question. The friends who celebrate your small victories. The community you build when the one you were born into fails you. Jennifer from work has become one of my closest friends. And our dinner outings have expanded to include other colleagues who share similar stories of complicated family dynamics. We call ourselves the Orphans Club, though most of us have living parents. We're orphaned from the families we deserved, rather than the ones we received. There's dark humor in our gatherings, but also genuine support and understanding. Aunt Sylvia introduced me to her book club, a group of women ranging from their 30s to their 70s who have all, in various ways, chosen themselves over toxic family expectations. Their stories mirror mine in some ways and diverge wildly in others. But the common thread is the same. There comes a moment when you realize that blood relation doesn't obligate you to accept mistreatment. I've started painting again, something I abandoned in college when my mother commented that Miranda's photography was more practical, and maybe I should focus on something with real career potential. Aunt Sylvia converted part of her garage into a studio space for me, and I spend weekend mornings there with coffee and canvas, rediscovering a passion I had buried under years of feeling like my interests didn't matter. My mother sent me a birthday card last month. It arrived at Aunt Sylvia's address. She must have gotten it from the attorney correspondence. Inside, she wrote, "I miss you. We all do. Please come home." I thought about responding. I thought about all the things I could say, all the grievances I could air, all the explanations I could demand. Instead, I threw the card away and went to dinner with my aunt. We ordered dessert first and laughed about nothing in particular and talked about my plans for the future. It was, without question, the best birthday I've ever had. Aunt Sylvia had planned a surprise gathering, Jennifer and the other Orphans Club members, some of her book club friends, a few neighbors who had welcomed me into the community over the past months. The backyard was strung with lights, the table laden with food that had nothing to do with Miranda's dietary restrictions. And every single person there had chosen to celebrate my existence. I cried again, but these tears were different. They came from being seen, from being valued, from understanding that I had built something beautiful from the wreckage of my family's rejection. At some point during the evening, Jennifer raised her glass for a toast. "To Vivian," she said, "who proved that the best revenge isn't success. It's peace." I've thought about those words often in the weeks since. Revenge implies anger, a desire to hurt those who hurt you. Peace is something else entirely. It's the absence of struggle, the end of hoping for something that will never come, the quiet acceptance of reality accompanied by the determination to build something better. I don't wish my parents ill. I don't fantasize about Miranda's marriage failing or Quentin's perpetual unemployment, or her children growing up to resent them the way I resented mine. I simply don't think about them very much anymore. And when I do, the old pain has faded to something more like melancholy, grief for what should have been rather than rage at what was. To anyone reading this who sees themselves in my story, the overlooked child, the family scapegoat, the one who's told their needs don't matter because someone else's needs are always greater, I want you to know something. You can leave. You can choose yourself. You can build a life where you're actually valued, where your presence is noticed and your absence is mourned, where you're not just filling space until someone more important needs it. It won't be easy. The guilt will come in waves, especially at first. You'll wonder if you're being too harsh, if you should give them another chance, if maybe you're remembering things wrong, and they really did love you equally all along. Trust your memory. Trust your experience. Trust the part of you that knows deep down that you deserve more than crumbs from someone else's table. I spent 26 years waiting for my family to see me. Now I'm spending the rest of my life seeing myself. It's better this way. It's so much better. And to my parents, if you're somehow reading this, I hope you understand now. I hope you look at the basement room that sat empty for 7 weeks and realize what you lost. I hope Miranda's children grow up to be kinder than their mother. And I hope Quentin eventually finds something he's willing to work for. But mostly, I hope you learn that love isn't a finite resource that has to be rationed. There was always enough for both of your daughters. You just chose to give it all to one. That's not my burden to carry anymore. I've put it down, and I'm walking away.